the show, Business Mastery for Startups, Scale-Ups, and Early Stage Businesses with your host, Jerry Gadori. That's me, and our good friend Trenton is joining. Trenton's another startup founder and an entrepreneur for many years. Today, we're going to talk about something we should all really already know, but that I don't think gets talked about enough. And that's how company culture not only impacts growth, but when done right, can be leveraged for growth. Now, Trenton, as I mentioned, is a serial entrepreneur. He's been a part of several early stage startups, but also, like myself, he's been in some larger organizations. So he can talk about the differences between, again, what it's like in the very early stages of a couple dudes around a table with a pizza and some beer, all the way up to running, a few thousand person company. So with no further ado, Trenton, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, appreciate it, Jerry. Yeah, Trenton Hughes, couple-time co-founder of a couple different businesses. One of them was called Helpware, which ended up being a pretty large organization with thousands of team members. And then another one called Station Entertainment. And then now I am running a venture studio where we're basically starting up new startups. But definitely have a lot of experience with culture, building teams, starting from very small teams and building them up, but also on the corporate side too. Yeah, I think that this is a really cool area where most people aren't thinking about how to actually grow a business from the culture end of things. I think that they look at it as a way to attract potential customers or attract potential employees, but not so much as a growth engine. So excited to chat.
That's great. Thank you for being on the show, Trenton. It's interesting. I think a lot of people steer away from culture because in their mind it's kind of frou-frou. It's kind of hard for them to define, and it's something they pay lip service to but don't really take seriously. Whereas the reality is, in my opinion, it's quite easy to define. I define it in my book. I talk about with my member companies all the time. But most importantly, it's done right. Gosh, to a negative extent, done wrong. It's going to define who succeeds in your organization and who doesn't. So
Yeah.
I think a critically important topic.
I think that the thing about culture, most of the time, the words that are used around it are typically pretty buzzwordy, that are safe.
Yes.
And they're not actually authentic to those leaders or to the business or the employees they want to hire. And when you're more general and broad like that and not thoughtful about it, then yeah, the culture can get away from you pretty quickly because it's not intentional enough and it's not specific enough. And in my experience, you have to be really specific, unique, and thoughtful with it. Otherwise, yeah, your culture will just run away from you and you won't have control over it. And part of what I think is necessary is actually to kind of lead in with the stuff that might not be as conventional from a culture perspective. And usually when I'm talking about culture, it starts with values, which are typically buzzwords that you see on the back of a wall that most people don't know if they're an employee. And then even the leaders oftentimes don't know what they are. Or if they do, it's just like teamwork, camaraderie, like regular stuff that you see. But I've been a fan of some of these orgs that, like if you've seen, Nike has a list of 10 values that they run off of, and they're very unique. They're very forward thinking. They're very like kind of fast paced, and it sort of sets the tone. And so I'm a fan of stuff like that is just more unique and different. Like for instance, in our venture studio, urgency is one of the ones that we go off of. Obsession is another one, which are typically not like the ones that you want to see, and they're not talked about as much in generic type of buzzword situations. But I think that's what I've seen. I'm curious what you have seen work well. Let's talk maybe from a values perspective first, and then why it works well, and then dive into it further.
I chuckled when you said it because I put it very nearly verbatim to what you said in my book. But I said culture is not what the CEO has framed behind their desk. Culture is what people tell their friends and family when asked about the company they work for. That's your real culture. And the other thing you said that really clicked with my own perspective, my own experience, is that culture happens. Cultures are like reputations. Everyone has one. The question is, did you build it or did you allow it to default grow? And if you run your company right, the default grow culture isn't necessarily a bad one. But if you're not aware of it, you can't utilize it for leverage. So for myself, at a generic level, I define a good culture as a company that embraces win-win situations, align goals, and has honest two-way communication. Those are what I look for as a basic foundation. There's things beyond that, obviously, but they tend to be a little bit more specific to the organization. But I found that those things, if you're building off of that core, you're not going to be far wrong. And we can talk about it later, but those become a part of your building a candidate attraction engine and your recruitment philosophies.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I think the reputation's pretty spot on. And so you got to be really thoughtful with that. I can talk about like how we did it specifically in a couple different orgs and why it worked or where it didn't in other places. But I think that going off of that, some of the most important things you can possibly do then is lead a culture by integrity as well as experience. Because as soon as you miss on the integrity side, that's your reputation. And that's pretty much hard to get back. Like that's,
yes.
And yes. Though I see just way too many companies and orgs that aren't leading with integrity, that aren't doing negotiations on the sales side as straightforward as they could be, who are looking for ways to cut corners because it's easier and cheaper or whatever it might be. That catches up to you pretty fast. And so you have to definitely practice what you preach. It sounds corporate too, but
100% yes, because I'm sorry, we lagged there for a second. I apologize for speaking over you. When it comes to integrity, that's a non-negotiable for me. And my philosophy is very simple there. If you have no integrity and you typically mistreat the people in your circle, it's not an if, it's a when that you're going to do the same with me. So why would I put myself in that situation to work with that person? It's like the old parable of the scorpion, which I'm sure you've heard. You know, it's the same thing.
What is it? What's the parable of the scorpion? I don't know if I've heard it.
Oh, you've not heard it? Oh my gosh. I can't remember where I first heard this, but the parable of the scorpion, it might be Jim Rohn, but the parable of the scorpion is this. A frog is sitting on a riverbank, just doing its froggy thing. And a scorpion walks up to him and says, Mr. Frog, I need to get across the river. Can you give me a ride on your back? And the frog said, no, scorpions sting frogs. I'm not going to let you on my back. And the scorpion said, foolish frog, if I sting you, I'll drown. Why would I do that? And the frog says, well, I guess, that makes sense. I'll give you a ride across. Scorpion hops on his back. They start swimming across. Sure enough, halfway through, Scorpion stings him. And as they start to go under, the frog goes, why did you sting me? We're both going to die now. And he said, foolish frog, scorpions sting frogs. That's what we do. And then they both drown. So I apply that to integrity. If we know that the person has none, we know what they're going to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah, I think, and if you're a part of an org and you see it going on, oh man, that's probably a time for you to run unless you have any control over how you can mitigate that. But yeah, very interesting. And then the same thing with experience. Like the experience isn't just the client experience. That will dictate a lot of your reputation and your culture, but it's also the employee experience, which is often just way too overlooked. Yeah. So like talking about culture real specifically for a second, 2 companies ago, Helpware, the one that I helped as a co-founder, ended up being the CXO over there. We were already doing some things in the market that were way different than other players. It was a very commoditized market, which is basically providing customer support teams to other companies. And it's a commoditized market where it's a race to the bottom, where people are just paying people really low wages in certain areas. Now, when I came on, it was already started, and I already saw that there was some special sauce there because they had these really cool offices. They were paying way above market rate in these areas. They were just hiring good people, and the people wanted to be there, which was unique to that space. And so when we started to realize that, and I came in and really helped to kind of craft that vision as well, it really became, we're just putting culture first. That's all it is. Our entire sales pitch on the sales side is culture first. Our entire employee pitch is that, and we're just going to practice what we preach, and we're actually going to do it. And so we really tried to focus on that. Now, this is back when pre-COVID, everything was still pretty much in office, but we had awesome offices and really cool locations. We were making sure that we were paying like substantially above the market rates of whatever people were normally getting paid. So they were stoked when they come over to us. Culture, just internally, we were trying to make sure that it was fun and that they were respected and they were heard and that they had time with the leadership, and we had fun like events and different things where we were really trying to make sure that they were taken care of. And now I think that a lot of people have caught on to this and it's becoming a lot more popular, especially in international hiring. But at the time, it wasn't so much. Like we stood out pretty quickly because of that whole thing. And that ended up being a growth fuel for us because not only were the employees happy, they were providing good work because they were happier. The retention was ridiculous. Like in that industry, I can't remember what the average retention is, but you churn like at least 10% of your staff a month usually. And we were at like 1 or 2%. It was super low. And so it sort of spoke for itself. And then from the client side, they're like, oh, we heard that you guys have amazing Glassdoor reviews. We see the culture from the people, and it just seems like these are really happy and good people. We want them. That's who we want. It's people that are being treated well. And it worked. And all of a sudden, we just started to have tons of leads, and it just sort of grew. And lots of people wanted to work for us, with us, want to stay with us, wanted to get promoted. That's another thing is, though, we had a lot of promotion opportunities. And I think when you don't, that gets tricky. We can talk about that too. Because I've seen stagnant organizations and I've been a part of that, and that sucks when you can't actually promote someone. That really does suck. But ultimately, yeah, it skyrocketed our growth, and I attribute it almost solely to the culture.
I swear, everyone listening, that Trenton is not a planted shill, because you literally just described the EFG leadership framework from the book. People, the foundation of good leadership is the team feels heard and valued. They're fulfilled by what they're doing, and ideally what the company is doing. They have growth opportunities. Their skills and their responsibilities are increasing, and ideally they have a path in the company. You do those three things, and you're going to crush industry standards for retention. When you do those three things, people only leave when something outside changes or something breaks. And sometimes something breaking isn't necessarily bad business. If your next step is due, you're ready, you're prepared for it, your skills, your experience is ready, and I don't yet have that, and you go somewhere else for it, that's a natural ending. But if I deal with that gracefully, you're going to go and there's a good chance that you'll come back, or at the very least you'll refer candidates to me. But what you just described, it's so funny because we're saying it in slightly different words, but that's literally the EFG leadership framework. And the reason why it does what it does, super simply, is because when people see people being treated well, this goes back to reputation and integrity and the whole scorpion thing. If you can see that I treat my team well and I treat them with respect and I value them, you can infer that I'm going to do the same thing with you as my client.
Yeah.
If you call your help desk dude and it's the same guy or gal all the time, that's a win. It's just, yeah. I could talk about this forever, so I'm going to stop now.
It's massive. So I think about it from an employer perspective, but I also can think about it from an employee perspective. When I graduated college, I jumped on with an organization that was a startup, a SaaS startup. And the only reason I went with them, they were actually a little bit lower of an offer from their salary than some of the other options I had. And I didn't have a ton of options, but had some okay options. And when I went into their headquarters, the culture, you could just feel it. At that time, I probably couldn't have defined it. But if I look back now, I'm like, it was fun. It was energetic. It was hardworking. Yeah, I don't know. There was just like a lot to it. And I think when I walked in, they were doing like the Harlem Shake. That was 10 years ago. They were all like doing a dance. They had like balls that they were throwing to each other in the air later. It's like, this is an interesting spot. And the culture just drew me in, and it drew a lot of people in. And so that company skyrocketed in growth. What ended up happening is that they got bought out by a private equity at a certain point, and that culture changed. And most of the people started to leave. And I don't know what's happened to that company at this point, but it changed quickly. And it also changed for me. And at that point is when I was about ready to leave. It took me a little bit of time, but I wasn't as motivated. I wasn't as happy there. You could just tell it wasn't a focus for them. And when it's not a focus, the reputation gets out, the experience is different, and people leave. But not only do people on the inside leave, everyone on the outside hears about it too. And that affects your business in general. So, what happens on the inside definitely will affect the outside.
Absolutely. You said another couple things that are really relevant. First of all, I've had really mixed results with PE firms.
Mm,
I've worked with some that do really well. They operate within a niche that they know really well. All of the leaders in the firm came from that space.
mm,
So they were really able to add value to the companies that they acquired. But unfortunately, most PE firms operate with the how much can we cut and still squeeze
yeah.
blood out of this rock mentality, and what you described happens. But it highlights something really interesting. That's that no matter how big the company is, cultures are malleable. You can be an industry giant, Fortune 100 company, and a significant change in leadership can
Mm,
change the culture of the company surprisingly quick. There's
yeah.
another old adage. I feel like the old man on the mount with these fables and parables. But that trust and culture integrity, they come in on a turtle and they leave on a horse.
Mm,
So, I mean, an extreme example that would be with Jack Welch with GE. When he took over, he intentionally changed the culture in a way that spurred growth, but some might argue created what the GE nightmare has become.
that's a great point. I think about it too, like with Disney, for instance, where it's Bob Iger that is their CEO now. So he left for a minute,
Yeah,
and it from the outside, I can only judge it from the outside, but it felt like things just sort of stagnated a little bit and maybe weren't as focused on culture, on growth, and you could just obviously things weren't going super well. And then he comes back, and it starts to feel like, okay, we're back on track. We're moving in the right directions. We're going
like
fast
Disney
again.
again.
Yeah, we're Disney again. That's how it feels, at least. And I bet you from the inside, it probably felt similar in some ways. I think there's something to that piece as well. Like when I look back at why certain cultures worked, growth was a big part. Like we are so focused on growth. I don't think people want to be a part of an organization that's just sort of stagnant, and they want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. And growth is a pretty nice motivator where we're all like, oh wow, there's a cool vision ahead of us that we can all have an impact on. And if I can be a part of this fast growing thing, that is really cool. When it stagnates though, or when it goes backwards, like how do you salvage it? I'm curious to hear from your perspective. Most of the time, it doesn't seem like you can, but I'm curious to hear if you think you can, and yeah, how you can do that.
Let me share a similar story a little closer to home. I'm not going to mention the company names because they're both still active. I know all the or most of the principals, and there's even odds that they'll be listening to the show. So I worked with a company years ago. They were a big IT staffing firm in the Southeast. They grew to about $150 million from revenue in about a decade, which in pure staffing is epic. You know, they got acquired by a larger staffing firm. And this is the key part. They were acquired specifically for their sales culture. Their founders were hands on sales guys. Their early hires were some of the best salespeople in the industry. They had a reputation as just a sales engine. And they were acquired for that reason. The company that acquired them, though larger, was more of an operationally focused company. Kind of your Iger, what's his name? Kopacek. The guy who took over for Iger was really
Yeah.
more of an operations guy.
Hmm.
And this company had that mentality. When they absorbed the company I was talking about from the Southeast, they then proceeded to completely suffocate that sales culture.
Mm,
Rather than accept that we bought them for that reason, they tried to change their culture to match their own because they were the acquirer. And the majority of the salespeople left as soon as they were able to,
well,
because it was just a different culture. And it's what you described, Trenton, kind of like that period in Disney's life. A lot of the brightest creative talent left. They started to have real problems. Like I can't think of his name for my life. It's either Kopacek, whatever.
yeah,
But he got into the famous public feud with Scarlett Johansson,
that's right.
where she wound up suing Disney, and just he destroyed their reputation. Very similar here. Now, in this instance, literally within 3 years, which might seem suspiciously like a vesting
Mm,
period to any founders who have been acquired before,
hmm.
all the leadership left.
Wow.
As soon as it was available, everybody left. So that's as ugly as it gets.
Yeah.
But there are ways to turn the ship. And I think Bob Iger is an example of that. And that's that they need to acknowledge the problem right off the bat. Publicly, they have to say, we did this, we should have done that, here we are.
Stop pretending.
The second thing is they've got to engage with people when they do that with what the new plan is and provide them a path to that.
Yeah.
So if you were in my company and we were good, then we're bad and we're trying to get to good again, I need to look you in the eye and say, Trenton, we effed up.
Yeah.
This is how we effed up and this is how we're going to fix it. Will you give me the opportunity to fix that?
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, taking that accountability and owning up to it, but then also painting a new vision of like, all right, here's what we're going to do. It's puts the onus on.
And giving a path to that.
Yeah. And the path to do that, to get them remotivated, to get them re-excited. Because otherwise, it's funny because I feel like most orgs, I could be generalizing, I could be completely wrong. Most orgs don't really have that great of a culture. They're just kind of there, kind of working average. They're just going through the day to day, and it's not motivating at all. But you know, people have to work. They pick up jobs that they need to pick up. But that starts from the top, right? Like that totally comes from the top and how they manage it. I think the top loves to blame the employees, but at the end of the day, they need to look in the mirror and be like, hey, this is actually in our control more than anyone else's.
Yeah. Ben Franklin said it best, the fish rots from the head down. And I will say, you know, I'm probably going to alienate some people when I say this because this seems to be everyone's least favorite superpower. But the more responsibility, I know I said it, the R word, but the more responsibility you take for the things around you, the more you have the power to execute change. And when leadership blames the employees, not only is it just evidence of the weakest leaders ever, but on top of that, they're robbing themselves of the ability to fix the problem.
Yeah.
If I say, if you and I are a two-person band and I say, Trenton's the problem, what I'm saying is I can't fix anything. And who wants to be in that position? I will never understand that.
That's a great point. And I feel like early in my hiring journey, I would hire these people and kind of hope that they were going to figure it out, and then they wouldn't. And I'd be like, oh man, I just hired the wrong person here. Eventually I had to take a look in the mirror and be like, no, this is me. I didn't set the right expectations. I didn't have the right training program. I didn't do all the right vetting that I should have done. There's a lot on me. And so at a certain point, I realized I need to stop being the best operator and start being the best like empower, the best trainer, the best hire. Because if I could do that, then the company could scale. And it was hard because I didn't want to let a lot of like my secrets of how I'd done well in my career out. But I realized, you know, there's no harm in sharing that. And then actually it's going to benefit the organization. It's going to benefit other people. And as soon as I started building that around my training programs and just trying to empower everyone else, that's when we flourished and grew the most. So, and people were happy.
100%.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny because, and you went through the evolution, obviously, but so many people get hung up on that. They believe that they've got this secret sauce that if anybody else learns, everything's going to fall apart.
Yeah.
But your businesses, like mine, were service businesses. Yep. And if there is a secret sauce, and I don't know if there is, but if there is a secret sauce, the secret sauce is your people.
100%.
You know, so yeah.
100%. Yeah.
So let's switch back to the topic we actually promised the crowd. So we've been talking around culture a lot.
Yep.
So how can we use culture as a leverage tool to grow?
Yeah.
And what does that mean as far as growth is concerned?
I think there's 2 or 3 things that are really key to be able to do that. Number one, you can build it into your sales pitch when you're talking to potential clients to let them know that this is super important to you and that alignment of culture is important. And I think that resonates with people because it shows that you're putting that first. Number 2, reviews and referrals are absolutely the way to grow big businesses. At the end of the day, like if you're looking for any business, let's say even a restaurant, you're going to go look up reviews. And if they don't have good reviews, you're not going to go to them probably. Very likely not going to. And that's the same thing with any B2B, any other business. So the more reviews you get on Glassdoor and anywhere, the better you're going to be as a business to potentially lure people in on the recruitment side, but also on the client side. Clients are going to check that stuff out. And then the third thing is when you have good culture and you have momentum, you should be shouting that from the rooftops. Like That should be all over your social media of pictures of parties you guys are doing, highlighting employees that did super well, people that won awards, all kinds of different prizes that were given out. As much as you can feature that stuff, B2B people or whoever are looking at this, they're like, oh, these guys are great. They're treating their people well. People are happy there. They have some cool things that they're doing. Over time, they'll probably be interested in working with you if they're a potential client, because they see how cool your culture is and how much you're focused on it. Versus if you didn't show any of that stuff, might be a red flag where you're like, I wonder if anyone actually works there or likes working there, or why don't they show anyone? Anyway, those are some of the things that we saw. And by doing all three of those things, I think that that's a huge reason as to why we grew businesses. People wanted to be a part of it. People were seeing it. They were hearing it. They could look up reviews. It validated. Some people go to review sites just to find businesses. So there's that element too. A ton of ways to grow from it that I don't think people are thinking through enough.
100%. You hit on something I want to talk about. So I talk about employer branding a lot, and the importance of building an employer brand in the places where your ideal candidates go. I can't remember, gosh, it was a couple months ago, I wrote a post about a big mistake a lot of companies make is they take their foot off the employer brand gas pedal when they're not actively doing any hiring. And I understand the logic. It's not complicated. We're not hiring. Why should we advertise? The problem is it's just not just candidates that look at your employer brand. Very often your internal employees are looking at that. Very often your investors and people thinking of investing you are looking at that. And very often your clients and prospects are. One of the things I found interesting is that literally every single one of the larger projects my consulting company has landed, whoever the decision maker was, in our instance, it's typically a founder or one of the senior leaders, but whoever that decision maker was always tears through all of my content. They're looking for consistency of message. They're looking to see about activity. They're looking to learn as much as they can before they sign a 6-figure contract.
100%.
And I would wager it's the same as you.
Yeah, 100%. All that stuff matters big time. 100%. Exactly. Couldn't have said it better. I think, when you're looking at trying to grow based on these cultures, though, kind of back, full circle, we do need to make sure that we're thoughtful about it in terms of like what exactly is that tone that we want to set? How are we rewarding people? How are we living by the values that we set? And making sure that all those things are being thought through in the right ways. Just because the culture might seem good to you, it might not be good to everyone else. So I think the problem is with it too, when you're trying to grow the business and trying to grow that culture, sometimes you can try to grow too much and you can start to exploit it and you can forget what got you there in that first place. So kind of to your point about the foot off the pedal, you just got to keep it on that the entire time and go back to those values. If they need to be revisited, go back to them, but make sure that we're just thoughtful with all of that stuff, because as soon as you stop, which I guess the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've seen people stop and then things start to change where they almost just rest on their laurels, and that just starts to have trickle effects. I think just being fully intentional about it is so big. And so actually one of the best things that we did, as we tried to grow, we tried to control as much of it as possible, but we started to hire really good people specifically for this, chief people officers, culture specific people that really were dedicated to that. And I think that that's where a lot of people miss, where they're like, I'm just going to have an HR team and we're going to kind of do what we've been doing, but the HR team's now going to do it and it's going to be outsourced to them. But they're not actually, like, there's separate teams for culture and HR. They're not the same. And so my whole point is make sure that you're really thoughtful with it. If it's working, keep making it work, and then hire really good people to keep it going or make it even better. And that was the thing that we actually did, is found people that even made it better. So that was cool. Sorry, my long-winded way of answering thoughts.
No, that was awesome. And you bring up a really important point. So making the assumption, and we're doing this for brevity because this is something you should never assume, but making the assumption that you've built your culture intentionally and you're starting to grow very rapidly. one thing to remember as a founder and as a leader, and I guarantee you've seen this in your life, Trenton, it happens often when startups start to really scale, is it seems like that agile young startup with the crazy awesome culture just starts to fall by the wayside. What happens very often is that founder is driving an incredible culture. That founder starts to build out the leadership team under them, fails to ensure that those leaders are treating people the way that he treated them.
Yeah.
That founder assumes that because they brought that leader up a certain way that they're also doing that. And what winds up happening is that culture that's so exciting and vibrant now dies at that next layer of leadership. And the people under that layer don't experience what that founding team did.
Yeah.
And generally the person at fault is that the founder didn't transfer those ideals and those values and that mission to the leaders they built under them or hired under them.
It resonates with me. I've worked with some really good leaders, both that I worked for and that I was able to hire. And yeah, what you're saying just makes a ton of sense. I think I've seen where I might have made hires of leaders and culturally it wasn't the same as what I was hoping. Now, I might have hired them because they had great experience, or I thought that they actually knew a lot more than me. And there's a lot of good reasons to make those hires, and they're great people. But culturally, it wasn't probably the best fit. And so, yeah, looking at that in hindsight, I'm like, oh, what could I have done differently is what I always look at. And oftentimes it was better value vetting, just really trying to make sure those values were intact, as well as the mission, and making sure that that's not only aligned, but just conveyed. And like both of those things continually conveyed. So I don't know if it's like, I honestly don't have a great answer of whether or not it needs to be people vetted and do they just inherently have that, or it's you setting an expectation, continually setting an expectation, or if it's both, probably both. But I'd love to hear your take on it.
In my experience, it's both, but it's mostly the latter.
Really?
You set the expectation, you manage to it.
Yeah.
And, another thing, so we talk often about delegation whenever you're growing a company, how important it is as a founder to learn to delegate and all that stuff. And that's certainly true. But one of the things that I think people get wrong is delegation isn't a flip you switch. It's a continuum you walk. So if I hire you, if I'm a founder and I hire you as the director of whatever, of IT or sales or whatever it is that you are, as I'm starting to delegate more and more authority in that space to you, I don't go, okay, Trenton, now you do it. The model that I love is the me, us, you model. So the first time was a new event, Trenton, you're just going to watch. I'm going to do it and you're going to observe. The second time, we're going to do it. The third time, or however many times until I'm comfortable, we are going to do it. And slowly you're going to be doing more and I'm doing less. And then the last time, you're going to do it and I'm going to observe. And then, and here's the second part where it sometimes falls down, another mistake people make is bad habits don't go away. They get replaced. So you've got to make sure that in that hypothetical example that I'm dropping back in periodically until I'm certain that you've absorbed things the way I want them done. Yeah. So in that hypothetical example, in a month, I'm going to watch you do it again to make sure that you're on track. In a month, I'm going to watch you again to make sure it's on track. In a month, I'm going to watch you again and make sure it's on track. And if I'm comfortable, then I'll go out a quarter. You know what I mean? Whatever that time is, it will vary. But that's key is again, making sure that the people that you're hiring are doing things the way you want them done. And because it's impossible for them to come aboard with that, you've got to be ready to work with them to get them there.
Great framework. And I've seen it work. I don't think I did it all the time at the beginning, but obviously like over time, that's sort of what we morphed into anyway. And obviously it worked well. So you know your stuff. But what, okay, that's half of the equation. How do you think you vet then? So even if that's 80% of the equation, how do you solve for that other 20%?
Yeah, for sure. So it starts unsurprisingly with knowing your culture well.
Yeah.
So let me take actually one step back to answer your question, make sure I'm doing it right. So when you know your culture well and you're working with, if you have one, your marketing team, if not, you're doing it yourself. When you're designing your employer brand, it is critical that your culture shines through your brand. So you want to make sure at a basic level, like your DEI strategy is visible in your brand. You know, you want to make sure that the way your company actually is to work with shines through in your brand. And that's going to do a couple of things. At a subtle level, it's going to attract people that are a match and repel people that aren't. Now that we've got the engagement of the people that we want and we're working through our interview, qualification, and offer phases, we need to ask questions like, so Trenton, what are you trying to achieve in your next role? What does your career path look like? What was it like in your old company? Can you describe what it was like working there? And you're listening for resonance. Now, you'll notice in these questions, I'm not giving you answers, because what I don't want to do is this. I don't want to say, hey, in this company, we value open, honest communication and feedback. Was that like that in your old company? Unless you're a moron, you know what to answer, you know? So you don't give the answer to the quiz, you know, along with the question. So you ask those types of questions. As they're answering, if there's resonance, then you probe a little bit and see what they say. And at each layer of the interview process, it should get deeper. And it should be most deep with the senior person who's doing the interview. Now, quick note here, I'm an advocate for interview being done at the lowest level possible, that there's competence, because I want to empower my managers so decisions can be made more quickly. A slow interview process is guaranteed to lose you top talent. But having said that, whoever the senior person is, they should be shepherding that culture. And once they get resonance, then you want to talk about those things and be open. Now, another quick note, and I'm totally monologuing, I'm sorry, but let's assume that you are the person that we hire when we bring you aboard. At the offer stage, I'm going to say, Trenton, one of the reasons we're making this offer is because you said this, this, and this. For clarity, that's the way we do it here, and that's our expectation of you. So they know there. Now, fast forward to the orientation. I take all the information that all the interviewers learn. I put that into the orientation and use that for building out the career planning and building out the employer reviews, so that I'm setting the expectation from day one. You wanted to achieve this, we want that too. You worked in that environment, you liked it, that's the way it is here. This one thing is different. I want you to know up front, we don't do that this way here. And we're going to focus on it until I'm sure you're matriculated to our point of view.
Smart. Yeah, I like that a lot.
So that was super wordy, but that's how I do it.
And I'm a big believer in the, you know, I hear a lot of leaders, and I probably did this early on, talk about people in terms of whether or not they're good or bad. You know, one of the most important frames I think most leaders could think through is not in a good or bad frame, but in a alignment frame. Are they aligned with
100%
what to do here? And usually when things don't work out, it's just because of a misalignment at the end of the day. So anyway, that's one thing I wanted to make sure I impart.
I have seen far more bad matches than bad candidates in bad companies.
And it's not to say anyone's bad or even the company's bad. Like there is no good or bad necessarily. It's all just alignment.
Yep. And here's another important thing to build off of that, Trenton, is when you do get that good alignment and you bring that person in, it's important that you keep a focus on maintaining that alignment. The more that person understands and you can demonstrate through your actions that you legitimately care about their outcome, the more they, through reciprocity, care about yours. Now, there may come a time when that alignment doesn't exist anymore. So maybe through life changes, you decide that you want to take a step back and the level of energy you have to give the organization isn't the same anymore. And it's a time when I need you to step up, not step back. Or maybe you're ready for your next promotion from a developmental perspective, and I don't have that available right now. That's a legitimate reason to have a natural end. It's not the end of the universe. You know, you're not slipping out a window with the family silver because we're no longer in alignment. But that is a legitimate reason to end things. And that doesn't have to be the end of the world. And again, at risk of making this large topic larger, part of the biggest change in the future of work movement is the relationship between employer and employee. It's no longer this nearly feudal system where the employer is here and the employee is here. They're peer relationships. And the more that we build long-term partnerships with our talent, the more that we appreciate that they're sometimes going to go and sometimes come back, the better access to top talent we have. And the more people want to be with us, and they're with us because they want to be with us versus having to be with us. And as soon as they can get a 15% pay raise, they're gone.
Yeah, that resonates. Just personally, it resonates because we've hired a lot of people over the years, and I think about that a lot. I don't know how many people are listening that are in the interview process, meaning that they're trying to find a job, but I think that there's a lot to that, and recognizing that, yeah, we're peer to peer, and you should be interviewing the business as well. It shouldn't just be the business has the upper hand. It really
Yes.
should be both. In many cases, the business is lucky to get these people, and so yeah, very interesting. I love this frame. And my apologies, my daughter's up from her nap, so it's probably a good time for us to wrap it here, Sam.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. One thing real quick. I interviewed a friend, Jonathan Corrales, a few weeks ago, and he helps predominantly tech people to prepare for tech interviews. And we talked about that exactly. The interviewer and the interviewee have a shared responsibility to ensure a good match. And if the interviewer allows it to devolve into an interrogation, the interviewee will not have the confidence to do that. So the more that we can normalize candidates walking into interviews and asking questions that are important to them and getting the answers they need, the more good matches we have and the fewer bad matches. And that only helps retention and growth.
I love that. And I think one of the things that we've done to frame that is to let them know at the very beginning of an interview, like, hey, this is two-way. We want to make sure that it's a fit on our end for you, but also your end to us. And the worst thing that could happen is that you get a job just because you need it and it's not truly a fit. Like, I think it's better for all of us if we're all upfront about whether or not this is going to work. And so I want to make sure you're asking questions and this actually feels like a fit. So that's one of the frames that we've used, and it seems like it helps. So
I love that.
cool.
I love that because you set the expectation from the word go. So listen, I know you need to wrap up. I hate to. I think we could talk about this all day. But if people are interested in learning more about what you're doing, how can they reach you? How can they get in touch?
We can connect on LinkedIn, Trenton Hughes on there. Yeah, feel free to send me a request and we can start chatting.
Awesome. So anybody listening, I will put Trenton's LinkedIn profile in the show notes so you can catch it there. I thank you very much for being on the show. I'd love to have you on again sometime, maybe once your org's
Cool.
up and running a little bit more, and we can talk about it a little more plainly.
Yeah,
That would be
appreciate
awesome.
you and appreciate all you're doing. Excited about it. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into this episode. As I'd mentioned, Trenton's information will be down in the show notes, as will the information for the Destination Employer Program, which we've been talking a ton about. So if you're a founder or early stage leader and you're looking to be able to consistently attract, recruit, and retain the top talent in the market and lead them into highly performing teams, that's the place you find out about it. Until next week, go make something awesome and be incredible.